You believe you have a personality. You believe you know who you are. But what if I told you that everything you call yourself is actually a defense mechanism? What if the person you think you are is just a psychological structure designed to keep you from experiencing what you actually are? Let's start with something fundamental that nobody wants to examine too closely. Your personality is not you. It is a construction. It is a learned pattern of behavior that developed in response to early childhood conditioning, social pressure, and repetitive emotional experiences. The traits you identify with, the preferences you claim as yours, the values you defend, these are not expressions of your authentic being. They are survival adaptations that hardened into identity. This is not an abstract philosophical claim. This is observable fact. Every behavior pattern you exhibit can be traced back to a formative experience, a parental influence, a cultural norm, or a traumatic event that required you to develop a specific response strategy. You are not born with a personality. You construct one, and the reason you construct it is because the raw, unfiltered experience of consciousness is too vast, too undefined, too threatening to the human need for control and predictability. The ego is the architect of this construction. It takes the infinite potential of awareness and reduces it to a manageable set of characteristics. It creates boundaries. It establishes preferences. It builds a story about who you are, what you like, what you believe, and how you differ from others. And then it defends that story with everything it has. Because if that story falls apart, what remains? The ego cannot answer that question, so it never asks it. Here is where it gets interesting. The personality structure does not just limit you, it actively imprisons you. It functions as a perceptual filter that determines what you can see, what you can think, and what you can experience. Every moment of your life is interpreted through the lens of your personality, which means you are never experiencing reality directly. You are experiencing a heavily edited version of reality that conforms to your existing self-concept. This is not a bug. This is a feature. The personality exists precisely to prevent new information from threatening your sense of self. If you identify as an introvert, your personality will filter experiences in a way that reinforces introversion. If you identify as intelligent, your personality will seek out situations where intelligence can be demonstrated and avoid situations where it might be challenged. If you identify as a victim, your personality will interpret events through a lens of victimhood, even when other interpretations are available. The personality is a confirmation bias machine. It is designed to prove itself right. And it does this by controlling your attention, shaping your perceptions, and limiting your range of responses. You think you are free because you can choose between options, but the personality has already determined which options you will even consider. You are making choices within a predefined framework, and that framework is so familiar, so automatic, so deeply embedded in your sense of self that you cannot see it as a framework at all. You mistake it for reality. To understand why this happens, you need to understand what the ego actually is. The ego is not an entity, it is a process. It is a continuous activity of self-reference, a mental habit of identifying with thoughts, feelings, and experiences and claiming them as mine. This process begins in early childhood when the brain develops the capacity for self-awareness. The child looks in a mirror and recognizes the reflection as itself. The child hears its name and learns to respond. The child experiences separation from the mother and develops a boundary between self and other. This is a necessary developmental stage. The formation of an ego allows the organism to navigate the world, to learn language, to develop skills, to interact with other humans. But here is the problem. The ego does not stop developing. It continues to elaborate itself, to build layers of identity, to accumulate beliefs and defenses and narratives, and at some point the structure becomes so complex, so rigid, so totalizing that it stops serving you and starts controlling you. The personality becomes a prison when it shifts from being a tool for navigating reality to being a substitute for reality. You stop experiencing life and start experiencing your interpretation of life. You stop responding to what is actually happening and start responding to your mental model of what is happening. And because the mental model is designed to protect your self-image, it will distort reality in whatever way is necessary to maintain that protection. One of the core functions of personality is to create the illusion of consistency. You believe you are the same person you were yesterday, last year, 10 years ago. You believe you have stable traits, enduring values, a coherent sense of self that persists through time. But this is a fabrication. There is no consistent self. There are only patterns of thought and behavior that repeat with enough frequency to create the appearance of consistency. Neuroscience confirms this. The self is not a thing. It is a process that the brain generates moment by moment. Every time you say I, the brain is constructing a temporary sense of selfhood by integrating sensory data, memories, and conceptual frameworks. This construction is so rapid, so seamless, so habitual that it feels like a continuous identity, but it is not. It is a series of snapshots that the brain stitches together into a narrative. The personality is that narrative. It is the story you tell yourself about who you are, and like all stories, it is selective. It emphasizes certain events and ignores others. It interprets experiences in a way that supports the plot. It creates characters and conflicts and resolutions, and most importantly, it has a protagonist, you. The person you think you are is the main character in a story that your brain is writing in real time. But here is the question nobody wants to ask. What happens if you stop identifying with the story? What happens if you recognize that the narrative is just a narrative, that the protagonist is just a mental construct, that the personality is just a pattern? What remains when the story ends? The reason most people never ask that question is because the answer is terrifying to the ego. If the personality is not real, if the self is not a fixed entity, then what are you? The ego cannot conceive of existence without identity. It equates the dissolution of personality with the annihilation of being, and so it resists any attempt to examine the foundations of selfhood. It deflects inquiry with distraction, with rationalization, with psychological defense mechanisms. This is why genuine self-inquiry is so rare. Most people engage in what they think is self-reflection, but they are actually just reinforcing their existing self-concept. They analyze their behavior, but they do so from within the personality structure. They ask why they do certain things, but they never ask who is doing the asking. They try to improve themselves, to become better versions of themselves, but they never question the fundamental assumption that there is a self to improve. True self-inquiry is not about self-improvement. It is about self-dissolution. It is about dismantling the personality structure piece by piece until you reach the ground of awareness that exists prior to identity. This is not a comfortable process. It is disorienting. It is destabilizing. It requires you to question every belief, every preference, every habit, every assumption about who you are, and most people are not willing to do that. They would rather live in a prison that feels familiar than risk the freedom of not knowing who they are. There is another dimension to this that needs to be addressed. The personality is not just an internal structure, it is also a social contract. You develop a personality in response to other people's expectations. You learn what behaviors are rewarded and what behaviors are punished. You discover what roles are available in your family, your culture, your society, and you choose the role that seems to offer the most safety, the most approval, the most advantage. This is why personality traits cluster around social archetypes. The caretaker, the rebel, the intellectual, the victim, the hero. These are not authentic expressions of individuality. They are pre-packaged identity templates that the culture provides. You select one or combine a few, and then you perform it. You perform it so consistently, so convincingly, that you forget it is a performance. You forget that you chose it. You forget that you could choose differently. And here is the deeper issue. Other people need you to maintain your personality, your relationships, your social status, your professional identity. All of these depend on you being predictable. If you suddenly stopped behaving according to your established personality patterns, the people around you would experience confusion, discomfort, even hostility. They have built their understanding of you around your personality. They have expectations. They have roles for you to play in their own narratives. And if you refuse to play those roles, you disrupt the entire social system. This creates a powerful incentive to maintain the personality structure, even when you become aware of it. Because questioning your personality is not just a personal crisis, it is a social crisis. It threatens your relationships, your career, your sense of belonging, and the ego uses this as leverage. It says, if you let go of who you are, you will lose everything. You will be alone. You will be invisible. You will cease to exist in the eyes of others. Let's examine how the personality defends itself. The primary mechanism is identification. The ego takes thoughts, feelings, sensations, and experiences and claims ownership of them. It says, this is my thought, my feeling, my experience, and through that act of claiming, it reinforces the sense of being a separate self. But notice what happens when you observe this process directly. A thought arises. Before you claim it, what is it? It is just a mental event, a fluctuation in the field of awareness. It has no inherent connection to you, but the ego immediately steps in and says, I am thinking this thought, and in that moment, identification occurs. The thought becomes your thought, and now you are responsible for it. You must defend it, justify it, or suppress it, depending on whether it aligns with your self-image. The same process occurs with emotions. An emotional state arises. It is simply a pattern of neurochemical activity, a physiological response to stimuli. But the ego claims it. I am angry. I am sad. I am angry. I am sad. And once the emotion is identified with, it becomes part of your story. You are now an angry person, a sad person, an anxious person. The personality absorbs the emotion and uses it to reinforce its structure. This is how the personality grows. It accumulates identifications. It builds layers of self-reference. And each layer makes the structure more rigid, more defended, more resistant to change. You become trapped in a web of identifications, and you do not even realize it because you are so completely identified with the web that you cannot see it as separate from yourself. So what is the alternative? If the personality is a prison, what does freedom look like? This is where most spiritual and psychological frameworks fail. They offer you a new personality to replace the old one. They tell you to be more mindful, more compassionate, more authentic, more present. But all of these are just new identifications. They are renovations of the prison, not escapes from it. True liberation is not about becoming a better person. It is about recognizing that the person is a construct. It is about seeing through the illusion of personality without trying to replace it with something else. This is not a state you achieve. It is a recognition that occurs when the mechanism of identification is seen clearly enough that it loses its power. What remains when identification ceases? Not nothing, not a void, not unconsciousness. What remains is awareness itself. Pure, unconditioned, non-personal awareness. This is not a thing you can experience because it is the condition for all experience. It is not something you can know because it is the knowing itself. It is not something you can become because it is what you already are beneath all the layers of personality. This is not mystical language. This is a direct description of your actual condition. The personality is a surface phenomenon. It is a pattern of activity occurring within a much larger field of awareness. You have mistaken the pattern for the totality. You have identified with the activity and forgotten the field. And that forgetting is the source of all psychological suffering. Here is something most people do not want to hear. Psychology cannot free you from this prison. Psychology is the study of personality. It categorizes it, analyzes it, attempts to modify it, but it never questions the fundamental assumption that personality is real, that the self is a valid object of study. Even though most sophisticated psychological frameworks, depth psychology, transpersonal psychology, cognitive science, all operate within the paradigm of selfhood, this is not a criticism. Psychology serves a function. It helps people manage their personality structures, reduce dysfunction, navigate relationships. But management is not liberation. Understanding why you developed a particular personality pattern does not free you from it. Knowing the childhood origins of your defense mechanisms does not dissolve them. You can spend decades in therapy. You can read every psychology book ever written. You can understand your personality with incredible precision, and you will still be imprisoned by it, because knowledge about the self is still self-reference. Analysis of the ego is still ego activity. The personality structure has no problem with you studying it, as long as the studying reinforces the assumption that there is a you doing the studying. The ego is perfectly happy to be examined, dissected, improved, healed. What it will not tolerate is being recognized as illusory. This brings us to another critical point. Belief systems, religious, philosophical, ideological, are personality structures operating at a collective level. They provide ready-made identity templates. They tell you who you are, what you should value, what you should fear, what you should hope for, and most importantly, they tell you that you are part of something larger than yourself, which gives the ego a sense of significance. But notice what happens when you examine a belief system closely. It is not based on direct experience. It is based on concepts, on stories, on inherited ideas. You believe in God, or you believe in science, or you believe in progress, or you believe in tradition, but these beliefs are not derived from your own inquiry. They are adopted from the culture. And they serve the same function as personality traits. They provide structure, they create boundaries, they give you something to defend. The problem is not the content of the beliefs. The problem is the mechanism of believing itself. Believing is an act of identification. It is the ego claiming a concept as true, and then defending that claim against competing claims. This creates conflict, both internally and externally. Internally, you must suppress doubts and ignore contradictory evidence. Externally, you must differentiate yourself from those who believe differently. And here is the deeper issue. Believing prevents knowing. As long as you are identified with a belief, you cannot investigate reality directly. You can only perceive reality through the filter of the belief. This is why people who are deeply invested in belief systems are often incapable of changing their minds even when confronted with overwhelming evidence. It's not that they are stupid or stubborn. It is that their identity is tied to the belief. To abandon the belief would be to lose themselves. One of the most insidious aspects of the personality structure is its relationship to time. The ego exists in psychological time. It is always referencing the past and projecting into the future. It says, I am this way because of what happened to me. I will become that way when certain conditions are met. The entire structure of personality is built on this temporal framework. But time, as you experience it psychologically, is not real. It is a mental construct. The past is a memory. The future is an imagination. Neither exists in the present moment. What exists in now? And the now, there is no personality. There are only sensations, perceptions, thoughts arising and dissolving. The sense of being a continuous self that persists through time is created by the mind, stitching together moments into a narrative. This is why meditation practices often emphasize present moment awareness. Not because the present moment is special or sacred, but because it is the only point at which the personality structure loses its grip. When attention is fully absorbed in the now, there is no past to regret, no future to worry about, no story to maintain. There is just what is, and what is does not require a self to experience it. The resistance to present moment awareness is the ego's resistance to its own dissolution. The personality needs time. It needs the past to establish identity and the future to maintain hope. Without time, the personality has nothing to reference. It becomes transparent, and this transparency is what reveals the prison for what it is. This is where the self-help industry becomes a problem. It promises you that you can improve yourself, that you can become a better version of who you are. But this is just the ego's strategy for perpetuating itself. Self-improvement is the personality trying to upgrade the prison. It is the ego saying, I am not good enough as I am, but if I work hard enough, if I develop the right habits, if I overcome my flaws, then I will be acceptable. But the entire premise is flawed. You cannot improve what is illusory. You cannot fix what does not exist. The personality is not a thing that can be improved. It is a process that can be seen through. And the seeing through is not an achievement. It is not something you do. It is something that happens when the doing stops. The spiritual marketplace exploits this confusion. It sells you techniques, practices, teachings that promise enlightenment, awakening, self-realization. But these are all just new identifications. You are no longer identifying as a flawed person. Now you are identifying as a spiritual seeker. You are no longer defending your old personality. Now you are defending your spiritual progress. The prison has been redecorated, but it is still a prison. True transformation is not additive. It is subtractive. It is not about gaining new qualities or capacities. It is about shedding the identifications that obscure what you already are. This is why the most profound teachings often sound paradoxical or negative. They do not tell you what to become. They tell you what to stop doing. Stop identifying. Stop defending. Stop seeking. Stop pretending to be something you are not. This brings us to one of the most uncomfortable questions. Do you actually have free will? Or is your entire sense of agency just another personality function? The ego claims authorship of your actions. It says, I chose this, I decided that, I am in control. But neuroscience shows that decisions are made by the brain before conscious awareness of those decisions arises. What you experience as free will is actually a post hoc narrative that the ego constructs to maintain the illusion of agency. This is not to say that choice does not exist. Choices happen, actions occur. But the entity you think is making those choices, the personality, the self, is not the author of them. Choices arise from a complex interaction of genetics, conditioning, environmental factors, neurochemical states, and unconscious processes. The ego simply claims credit for them after the fact. This is deeply threatening to the personality structure because agency is core to identity. If you are not the author of your thoughts and actions, then who are you? The ego cannot answer this question without dissolving itself, so it defends the illusion of agency with tremendous force. It insists that you are in control, even when every aspect of your experience contradicts this. But here is what happens when you stop believing in the illusion. Freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but freedom from the burden of maintaining a self. When you recognize that thoughts, feelings, and actions arise on their own, you are no longer compelled to defend them, justify them, or claim ownership of them. You can observe them, respond to them, allow them to pass. And in that allowing, there is a kind of effortless flow that the ego, with all its striving and controlling, can never access. Suffering is what keeps most people locked in the prison of personality. And suffering is created by the gap between what is and what the ego wants. The personality has preferences. It wants things to be different than they are. It wants pleasure and avoids pain. It wants approval and fears rejection. It wants control and resists uncertainty. And every time reality fails to conform to these wants, suffering arises. But notice that suffering is not caused by reality. It is caused by resistance to reality. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. Pain is a physical or emotional sensation. Suffering is the story the ego tells about that sensation. It is the identification with the pain, the claim that it should not be happening, the belief that it means something about who you are. This is why acceptance is so powerful. Not acceptance as resignation or passivity, but acceptance as a clear seeing of what is without the overlay of ego interpretation. When you stop resisting reality, suffering dissolves. Not because the circumstances change, but because the mechanism that creates suffering, the gap between what is and what should be, no longer operates. The personality resists this because acceptance threatens its existence. The ego is built on resistance. It defines itself by what it is not, what it rejects, what it fights against. If you accept everything, there is nothing left to push against. There is no conflict, no struggle, no drama. And without drama, the personality has no material to work with. It cannot construct a story. It cannot maintain itself. This is why ego death is such a common theme in transformative experiences, psychedelic experiences, mystical states, near-death experiences. These states temporarily disrupt the personality structure. The identifications dissolve. The boundaries break down. The sense of being a separate self disappears. And what remains is a direct experience of consciousness without content, awareness without an object, being without an object, being without identity. People who have these experiences often describe them as the most profound moments of their lives. They report a sense of liberation, of coming home, of recognizing what they have always been beneath the layers of conditioning. But here is the problem. The ego rebuilds itself. The personality structure reasserts itself. The experience becomes a memory, and the memory becomes another identification. Now you are someone who had an enlightenment experience. Now you are someone who knows the truth. The prison has been rebuilt with new materials. This is why temporary experiences of ego dissolution are not the same as permanent liberation. Permanent liberation is not a state. It is a recognition that never leaves once it has been clearly seen. It is the understanding that the ego is a process, not an entity, and that you are the field in which that process occurs, not the process itself. And this understanding does not make the personality disappear. The patterns continue. The habits persist. The preferences remain. But they are no longer mistaken for what you are. They are seen as conditioned responses, as mechanical functions, as impersonal processes. And when they are seen this way, they lose their power to imprison you. Here is the final paradox. You cannot seek liberation from the personality structure using the personality structure. The ego cannot free itself. The seeker cannot find what it is seeking because the seeker itself is the obstacle. Every effort to escape the prison is just the prison rearranging itself. So what do? Nothing. Not nothing as a strategy, but nothing as a recognition that there is nothing to do. The liberation you are seeking is not a future attainment. It is a present fact that has been obscured by the activity of seeking. You are already free. You have always been free. The only thing preventing you from recognizing this is the belief that you are not free, and the effort to become free based on that belief. This is not something you can make happen. It is something you can only allow. And allowing is not an action. It is a cessation of action. It is a stopping of the incessant doing, the constant seeking, the perpetual striving that the ego uses to maintain itself. What happens when the seeking stops? The prison becomes visible. The personality structure reveals itself as a construction. The ego is seen as a process, not an entity. And in that seeing, there is a shift, not a dramatic transformation, not a sudden enlightenment, but a quiet recognition that you are not who you thought you were. You are not the personality. You are the awareness in which the personality appears. So here is what I am telling you. The person you think you are is not real. The personality you defend is not authentic. The self you identify with is a psychological structure designed to protect you from the unbounded nature of consciousness. It is a prison you built so carefully, so thoroughly, so convincingly, that you forgot it was a prison at all. You called it personality, you called it identity, you called it yourself, but it is not you. It never was. You are what remains when the personality is seen through. You are the awareness that is aware of the personality. You are the field in which all experience arises and dissolves. You are not a thing. You are not a story. You are not a collection of traits and preferences and memories. You are the space in which all of this occurs, and that space has no boundaries, no limits, no prison walls. The only question is, are you willing to see this? Are you willing to let go of everything you think you are and discover what you actually are? Because the moment you are willing, the prison doors open, not because you found the key, but because you finally realize they were never locked.